Okay, let's see if we can't do one of these problems here. So we have this neutralization reaction where we have sulfuric acid reacting with sodium hydroxide, so acid-base, a neutralization type of reaction. And it's going to yield sodium sulfate and water. And we're given two starting masses for the reactants here, one for sulfuric acid and sodium hydroxide. And this is asking us to calculate the minimum mass of one of the reactants here, sulfuric acid, calculate how much of that might be left over after the reaction goes to completion. Okay, so let's tackle this. Again, we're calculating how much of a reactant might be left over. So let's go ahead and write the chemistry out first. So I have sulfuric acid, so H2SO4. It's a 4 plus sodium hydroxide, NaOH, and that is going to then yield the salt, Na2SO4, plus the water. Okay, write the reaction and then make sure you balance things. I start with the metals. We have 2 sodiums right there, 2 sodiums. We have one sulfate, H2O, so we have 2 H's, so we have 4, so we probably need to put a 2 right there. So now I have everything balanced out how it needs to be. Okay, so we're giving 2 starting concentrations, or 2 masses, I should say. And so we need to figure out which one of these is the limiting reactant. That is step 1. Figure out which one is the limiting reactant. Once we find that out, then we can go back and do the stoichiometry of the reactants to figure out how much is going to be left over. Okay, so let's do that. So I have 79 grams of H2SO4, and I have 45.4 grams of sodium hydroxide. All right, so we need to convert to moles. So the molar mass of H2SO4, hopefully I can get this right in my head. So 16 times 4 is 64, and 32 is 96, 97, 98. There are 98 grams in 1 mole of H2SO4. Hopefully we're right on that one. And I know this is where the stoichiometry, we need to pick one of these products to choose. So that it has to be the same for both the sulfuric acid and the sodium hydroxide. So I'm going to choose water here. Okay, so I know that for every 1 mole of H2SO4, I produce 2 moles of water. So for every 1 mole of H2SO4, then I produce 2 moles of water. Now in this case, I don't need the grams. I can keep it in moles now that I've already done the stoichiometry, so I'm going to leave it at that and come down and set up down here. Now we got to convert to moles, and so I know that there are, in sodium hydroxide, that's 23, and 16 is 39, 40. So there are 40 grams of sodium hydroxide in 1 mole of sodium hydroxide. Now again, we need to choose the exact same product that we chose in the one up above with the sulfuric acid. And so I know for every 2 moles of sodium hydroxide, I'm just looking at my equation, 2 moles of sodium hydroxide, I make 2 moles of water. Okay, so I get that right here. For every 2 moles of sodium hydroxide, I make 2 moles of water. The process is convert to moles, then do the stoichiometry. And if this is one where we're calculating how much of a reactant is left over, we can stop at moles. And so let me get out my calculator. I have 79 divided by 98 times 2 equals. So I get up here 1.6122 moles. We'll just got to that many decimal places right now. And on the bottom I have 45.4 divided by 40 times 2 divided by 2. So down here I get 1.135. Okay, so if I look at these two molar amounts, these are moles of water that I am going to get out of this reaction, then I can see that the limiting reactant, the one that runs out first, the one that gives me the fewest number of moles, is sodium hydroxide. Okay, this is asking me to calculate the mass of sulfuric acid that is going to be left over. Sulfuric acid is not the limiting reactant, and so I know there is going to be some left over. Let us just say, for example, that sulfuric acid was the limiting reactant and it's asking for sulfuric acid. If sulfuric acid is the limiting reactant and it is the one that we're looking for, then it is going to run out first and the answer would be 0. I didn't explain that too well. Let's look at this problem. In this problem, let's say that the problem asks for something different. It asks for how much sodium hydroxide would you have left over? Well, sodium hydroxide is the limiting reactant. It is going to run out first, and so your answer you would put in your homework is 0. However, it is asking for sulfuric acid, so we need to go and calculate the sulfuric acid that's going to be left over in grams. All right, so we just start over using the limiting reactant. So I know, let's just start here and do our stoichiometry. There are 45.4 grams of sodium hydroxide that I'm starting with. Okay, that is going to react. Let's get that into moles. So I already did this. There are 40 grams of sodium hydroxide in 1 mole of sodium hydroxide. Now I have to calculate this, how much that sodium hydroxide is going to consume sulfuric acid. And how will it do that for every 2 moles of sodium hydroxide? Oh, my pen just ran out of ink. Come back, come back, come back. Okay, that for every 2 moles of NaOH, then I'm going to consume 1 mole of H2SO4. Now, it's asking for the answer in grams, and so I'm going to say for every 1 mole of H2SO4, I already said that there are 98 grams. There are 98 grams. Okay, this is going to give me the grams that are consumed by the sodium hydroxide. It's not telling me how much is left over, it's telling me how much is consumed. And so let's do that math. We have 45.4 divided by, oops, let me go back here, darn it. So I have 45.4 divided by 40 divided by 2 times 98 equals. So we consumed 55, darn thing again. We consumed 55.615 grams. That's how much we consumed. We started with 79. So if I do 79 minus 55.615, then that will give me how much is left over. So I'm going to do 79 divided by 55, or minus, darn it. I have 79 minus 55.615 equals, that's going to be 23.385. And when I account for sig figs, which are going to be 2, because I have 2 right there, so my answer is going to be 23 grams left over. So let's just review. write down a balanced chemical equation. If it's asking for how much is left over, then we only have to do the limiting reactant up to moles for both, in this case, the sulfuric acid and the sodium hydroxide. When I did that, I found that sodium hydroxide was the limiting reactant. However, it's asking for how much sulfuric acid is going to be left over. There is going to be some left over because the sodium hydroxide is going to run out first. Okay, once I find that out, then I start with sodium hydroxide over here. I get that into moles, and then what I do is I do the stoichiometry. For every 2 moles of sodium hydroxide, I'm going to consume 1 mole of H2SO4, and I convert that into grams. The answer of this problem that I just did right there is going to be how many grams of sulfuric acid were consumed, not how many's left over, how much was consumed. And so I'll take the original amount minus how much was consumed, and that will give me my answer. These aren't that tricky. You just kind of have to realize what's being asked, and I think that we can do that. All right, it's a good thing I'm a nice Mormon kid and I didn't swear when I made those mistakes. We can do this one.